Welcome to the Friday edition of G'day Sharm El-Sheikh. Andrew Petersen is my name, the CEO of the Business Council for Sustainable Development Australia. And today's session comes to you from the Australian Pavilion, no less. And in fact, in a meeting room in the Australian Pavilion. And in a minute, we're going to welcome three Aussies. All right, so we're joined today by Gary Wyatt from Corporate Carbon, Matthew Warnken from AgriProve, and Mary Stewart from Energetics. Hang on, that's better. And so, first question, which I've now completely forgotten. You've been here for a week. Tell us what you've been watching here and talking about doing. Gary, over to you first.
Thanks, Andrew. Good morning, everyone. I think it's more, what I've been up to, just about making connections, meeting like-minded people, sharing ideas, trying to kind of exchange what works for us in Australia in terms of, the decarbonisation business we're involved in and, what's going on or working for players around the world. Really say very much emerging market focus. So talking a lot to the emerging markets, and I think that's probably a function that we're quite involved in the nature-based solutions and the opportunities for that in emerging markets really outweighs like a lot of the other opportunities we've got. So it's really just about sharing ideas, like finding what could be done at a practical level to implement, practical concrete outcomes. And that idea exchange is fantastic. There's so much going on. You feel like so much momentum. There's a lot of interest, drive from the finance industry about finding opportunities to deploy capital. And certainly the sense I got through this whole conversation is there's more capital available than there are opportunities to deploy it.
Right.
And that's probably, where we see ourselves coming in, like our role, our job in this, is then to find those opportunities. What are those projects? How can we make them stack up so that the capital can get deployed? A little bit less focused on the minutiae of the negotiations or the exact details.
The minutiae of the negotiations.
Exactly, because that can be very tiring. And also you provide a great summary from time to time. So that's what we're relying on in terms of that.
I forgot to ask the important first question. First COP, fifth COP, 10th COP?
First COP for me. So it's definitely a learning experience. There is a little bit of culture shock, Sharm El-Sheikh, but a lot of culture shock walking into the COP and seeing what's going on.
Seeing the world come at you literally down the corridor.
Exactly.
Quite extraordinary.
Exactly, yeah. Walked past the US delegation, I think it was Nancy Pelosi, surrounded by a whole ton of US press and US police officers, and she definitely couldn't see anything of COP.
She's about that. Yeah, I was going to say she's quite short.
Yeah, very short, yeah.
And Biden arrives today, so this place is going to be in lockdown anytime soon.
Yeah, don't check TripAdvisor.
Seriously, there's a terrorism alert out for Sharm El-Sheikh today.
Really?
I do wonder if it's voiding my insurances.
No, I think it's.
So don't go parachuting.
I think it's the food. All right, Mr. Warnken.
Yes.
You've been here a week.
Oh.
And you've been on a screen at the Australian Pavilion.
Yeah. No. And actually, I think the pavilion has really shaped this COP. It was certainly an experience for me. So this time, not only is the second year in a row Australia's had a pavilion, but they've been running events. So there's actually been events hosted here in the pavilion.
So there weren't events
at Glasgow.
Ah, right.
Well, not the same sort of like microphone. In Glasgow, there's a no microphone sort of policy. So, so it wasn't real, and it was a sort of more close to slightly more expansive setup. Oh. So that's provided a great opportunity in terms of showcasing a raft of Australian and other kind of issues spanning multiple fronts.
And I just want to add, really good attendance, the ones I've been to, and not just Australians.
Yes. So and the Australian delegation, like everyone here is doing such a good job, in terms of keeping the coffee running, so everyone's caffeinated. But yeah, it is such a friendly vibe. And interestingly, fun fact, did you know that the Australian ambassadors for climate change no longer involved directly in the negotiations?
I did know this,
Yeah,
yes.
so I did it, but I think that sets a different tone too, because it's all about now sort of negotiations and building those relationships.
Yeah.
So building up on Gary's point, all about those connections and those relationships. And I think one of your guest panelists from yesterday summed up well too. It feels like a business conference.
Yeah.
And in terms of making those connections, so certainly the Australian pavilions create that space to have those conversations and those connections. One of the big takeaways from me is we had pretty much all of the soil carbon project developers happened to be at an ITER stand in the ITER event, which was fantastic.
Yes, because you linked in about that.
Yes.
Yes.
And they're all having done the hard yards in terms of the measurement and project development. We're all now going to be starting to issue credits. So there will be some, hopefully some formalizing of those networks and starting to really promote soils as a nature-based solution.
Fantastic.
And very much that this is the most current up-to-date science of soils.
Wow.
So that's made the COP essentially for me in terms of those connections. And so to your point, Andrew, the world's come here, so you can pretty much catch up with 15 different countries all in the afternoon. And so much so that I haven't had any of the updates on what's happening technically, because I haven't been swamped literally with all those other connections and discussions. So I'm also in the camp of like, well, I don't really know what the minutiae is going on, but glad that there's experts who've got that in hand, because there is so much going on.
But I think just to go to that point, I think that's been, for me, one of the other big differences about this COP, that the process seems to have matured into a number of different elements, a number of different layers. You've got the negotiations that now go on, but they are not the only center of focus for everybody who comes to them. There are now these elements of business engagement. I mean, there was an ICC conversation around trade in the last 24 hours. And whilst that was a policy discussion about 5 years ago, it's now about what modalities in the WTO process have to be put in place for effective transfer of technology to happen a lot quicker than they had in the past.
Yeah.
So the WTO is now stepping up to what's its implementation process going to be as a result of what's coming through in the policy processes.
Yeah.
Mary, what about you? What have you, well, you've been doing so much. You're competing with me in terms of putting things out on LinkedIn. I think.
Jealousy makes you ugly, Andrew. What have I been following? I mean, really, I come to these events to try and work out what it means for business. And for that reason, I've been following the emerging discussions around finance. So in the negotiations, we're going to hear a lot about loss and damage and money flowing to make recompense for loss and damage. There's going to be money flowing for resilience, and there's going to be money flowing for the mitigation work plan. So somewhere along the line, this process is going to release huge amounts of money. What I'm trying to understand is the value of blended finance and how the private sector not only takes this money, but magnifies the money and leverages it and really starts to move the gauge forward. And there are conversations around, for example, the Lightsmith Group, who've taken adaptation money and applied a multiplier of nearly 190 times when it comes to the fund that they've established and what they're actually putting out there to make real companies grow. It's not about building seawalls. It's not about building defenses. It's about building the sectors that will take us forward.
Right.
So finance is one side of it, and just working out what business does to sensibly use that public sector money better. I've also been following some of the negotiations, watching what's happening with the mitigation work plan. So that's helping, really going to be put in place to help developing countries work on what they should be doing with respect to emissions reduction. Bit concerned about some of the conversation we're hearing about potentially backing off on 1.5.
Yeah.
And just listening to the coalition of the willing, who are making sure that that stays firm. Grateful to hear that Australia is part of that.
Absolutely.
That's probably enough. Ask me another question and we'll see what the answer is.
Well, I was just going to staple onto the back of it that BCSD Australia is part of a coalition of eager and willing businesses or business organisations at the COP who are ensuring that those countries that are threatening to backslide are going to be held to account for that. And so you're going to see in the next couple of hours a statement out from the We Mean Business Coalition, of which BCSD Australia, thanks to its members, is going to be supporting, saying no backsliding. And we've very much got the back of, I think it's the Canadians and the Australians who are negotiating with the COP presidency about the ensuring that that language of 1.5 remains in the text that will come out from this particular conference. Yeah.
The other big take up for business from the COP to date has been the net zero emission standard. So the high level expert group on net zero.
And what are you calling it? Are you calling it HLEG? Are you calling it HLEG? Are you calling it HLEG?
I'm calling it don't greenwash.
Okay.
Because it's going to get in, it's going to be a problem. And just there's been, I'm going to say 5 large announcements from the WFG fans, the UK government. There is a groundswell of opinion and pressure to get net zero right for companies.
It's to me the ISSB moment of this conference. Absolutely. And as I said yesterday in the show, Catherine McKenna is coming on the show next week. We're going to have an actual one-on-one with her around that, because I think it's absolutely one of the most significant outcomes for business out of this conference.
And what business needs to understand is it's SBTI plus some more.
Plus some more, yeah. That's a baseline. That's not the gold plate anymore. That's baseline, which is quite amazing.
5 yearly targets starting in 2025.
Now, if we just get countries to actually do that kind of thing, well, anyway, move on. Question without notice to all 3 of you. Most significant conversation you've had with somebody here? I'll start, because it gives you time to think. It was one of the volunteers. She is a IT student at Cairo University, and she said to me that she was doing this because she wanted to come and be part of the world. And it was just humbling to hear that she felt that this was her way of getting into this conversation, and not the tears, but just the elation of seeing on her face that she was meeting so many different people standing on the pavilion that she was and helping people with their IT during the COP. That was her role, but she was meeting different people, different walks of life, in circumstances where she said she would never get to meet these people, and that it had just broadened her mind about not just what this issue was, but what the challenges of our planet were. It was fascinating to hear it being surmised in that way. Anybody want to take a stab at most significant conversation?
I'll give it a go.
Go.
It was, and I can't remember exactly, but one of the panel discussions that I was listening to got into, as these things often do, the common accounting rules, especially around projects, and discussion about additionality. And I think what came out of that is it's almost irrelevant. We should be more worried about the outcomes. So it was like, in the context of that panel discussion, it was about additionality versus causality.
Yeah, right.
But really, it's like the outcomes. And I think, certainly us as project developers operating under quite strict accounting rules, and kind of get sucked into all these carbon accounting rules.
Yeah.
That can be quite tedious, but like what we really care about is the outcome. And that kind of resonated with me, because in Australia at the moment, we have Chubb Review looking at emissions reduction fund, and really kind of drilling into the details of how the rules, accounting rules work around that. But at a higher level, it's like, well, what outcomes are we delivering? That's the really important thing. So anyway, that was the takeaway. And in fact, I think it might have even been a panel at soil carbon.
So I know what you'd expect.
Which is a beautiful segue to Matthew.
Yeah. So be hard pressed to pick one.
Yeah.
Because it's been such a combination of them. But just to maybe follow on from Gary's point and this issue that Mary you flagged in terms of backsliding on 1.5 degrees Celsius.
Yeah.
So the real benefit of coming to COP is that getting that panorama of perspectives and sort of you almost like come face to face with the challenge that we all have in terms of delivering on a safe climate.
Yeah.
And with even just that potential that we could give up on 1.5 degrees Celsius, that perspective puts in sharp relief in terms of the focus of the Chubb review.
Yeah.
And so why are we focusing on the minutiae? Why my personal belief is that we should be spending that sort of time and effort focusing on how we move from 120 million tons of abatement to 1 billion tons over 2030, and what's the concrete implementation plan to get there. So there is we were swapping countries, but fiddling while Rome is burning. So I think that now we need to all spell integrity with 1.5 degrees Celsius. And so to Gary's point, if we don't get that outcome, it's kind of like integrity without 1.5 degrees Celsius is so hollow and self-serving.
Yeah.
And I think that again, that's the challenge of the implementation of and Sharm El-Sheikh is almost the embodiment of climate and COPs, that actual town and the built construction itself. So you've got these beautiful 5-lane highways, which is the equivalent of the targets, the climate targets, which all look great.
Yeah.
And there's this massive sort of constructions, but they're half built. There's all these huge footings, which is kind of like implementation without follow-on capacity and actually delivery. You end up with this sort of like weird, distorted outcome. You don't get the outcome that we need. So I'm going to take a leaf out of Energetic's book and find a way as to how to put 1.5 degrees in the spelling of integrity. Now that might be a bit challenging because I don't know that there's a C word, but I'm going to give it a go. But I think that for me, that's going to be the absolute take home. I'm going to just keep repeating it and again, that if we don't have that perspective of delivering 1.5 degrees Celsius and a real risk that we backslide on that and we lose that attention, that common goal, like we are kidding ourselves in terms of like, these like my idea, full court press on everything. And, the encouraging thing is that, there are those financiers, developers, project businesses who are getting behind to make that a reality.
Your conversation, please.
I'm going to get the acronyms wrong. I went to the launch of the high-level champions for climate change from the private sector in Africa.
Yes.
So there are 150 CEOs across Africa who are taking on this climate challenge.
Yep.
And they published their position paper with the assistance of the United Nations, of UN, CG, I'm getting it wrong, the compact. The
global compact. Yeah.
And I had a conversation with one of the Nigerian CEOs, and it was just extraordinary to hear the desire, understanding where they come from and the economies and the challenges that they have running a business.
Yeah.
And they have the same sophistication around delivering net zero and the same desire to get it right. And there are 150 African companies that are starting that journey, and they've got to spread that word because this is the world's second biggest continent.
Yeah.
We've got to get it right in Africa as well as everywhere else.
Right.
It was great.
Right. Okay. Well, that's quite interesting. All right, let's move on to the last question, which I'll mash from the two that we were going to talk about, which was you both leaving, all three of you are leaving in the next 24, 36 hours from this place. What are you taking away and what are you going to be watching after you've left? So next week, what's going to be the thing for you that say marks this COP as a success, or as we're calling it, the good COP? So Mary, do you want to start? We'll go back the other way.
Obviously watching to make sure that the negotiations continue on track.
Yep.
That there's no backsliding on Glasgow.
Yep.
It would be great if there was some sharpening of the Glasgow climate pact words.
Yep.
I don't expect that to happen. So
Do you
the
think
word-
coal will turn up again?
Well, those are the words I'm talking
Yeah,
about,
right.
is the phase down and the phase out of fossil fuels.
Yeah.
And to make sure that those remain there
Yeah.
in the intention of any text that we get. Other than that, just as you say, there appears to be agreement. If there's this much agreement, surely we can push stuff through faster.
Yeah.
Let's have some ambition as opposed to just everyone seems to be putting around the difficult things at the moment.
Right. Matthew.
So as said before, spelling integrity with 1.5 degrees in it.
That is now troubling your mind.
Yes, I'm going to find a way. But so, you know, and look, yesterday there was a real sense of step change in terms of the amount of activity around COP. I think today's going to be a bit busier.
Yeah.
My mind boggles as to what next week's going to be like in terms of, you know, typically the second week just being even more frenetic than the first. So I think there's just going to be this massive activity. So good luck.
Yeah, thanks.
in that
I think
second week.
it will actually be. I'm being melodramatic, but deliberately so. I think it will be psychotic, but in a positive way.
Yeah, but that's, I guess, what I'm looking for is, so COP is obviously signaling globally where we're heading on climate.
Yeah.
So looking in terms of that continuation of momentum.
Yeah.
And yeah, so looking, you know, for any signs of backsliding is obviously, you know, negative. So avoiding backsliding and continue to progress, you know, is really, really positive. Talking up COP31. Yeah, it's very
Yes,
specific,
good point.
COP. So I think that is a really positive thing for our region too, to focus on and work towards.
And can I just inject into that I'm going to do a call out to the members saying, what should we be telling the Australian government now we want to see at that COP? So I've already got a checklist of things that I think we can share with them. But, you know, what's that macro and micro thing that we can give them now? Number one is good food. But putting that aside, although Maslow's hierarchy of needs, getting people well fed and well watered enables them to have good conversations, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But also remembering the words of Minister Pat Conroy, this is a Pacific COP. that
Totally.
We're looking for.
Yes.
It's not the Australian COP.
Yes.
So we need to be
And
clear
how
about
are we
that.
going to do that?
Yes.
How are we going to do that? So I'm big call out to the members to say, let's start helping the government think about what that's going to look like. Sorry, back to you, Matt.
Yeah, no. Well, I just echo the theme. So it's building up continuing momentum and progress without backsliding. So I'm happy for just, you know, like small progress, because I think, you know, COP's now become the lodestone for companies, organisations, those discussions to have to build momentum. So if we can avoid going back, make some sensible progress going forward, because we are sort of filling in the details.
Yeah.
So, like negotiating on sort of big outstanding issues from my perspective.
Yeah, it's like you feel like we're writing a forward contract for everything that now must be done.
Yeah,
as opposed to the discussion about should there be a contract in the first place.
Yeah.
That's the pivot for me in this column.
Yeah, absolutely. That is the pivot.
The last word to you, Mr. Wyatt.
No, look, it is my first COP, but the kind of sense I get is maybe the process has matured somewhat in that, you know, the success of this COP won't come down to the final words at the very end. It is the process and the cumulative action, and you know, a lot of that COPs are, you know, a lot of it is about government action, but you know what we're seeing at this one is like massive private sector action,
Yeah.
private sector action too. And I think for me the takeaway is, you know, the private sector is expressing all these good desires. They're really talking quite progressively about decarbonization, things like that. Strong takeaway for me is like, well, how do we translate that into something concrete and make sure and have an accountable way to hold the private sector to that. So, you know, there we spoke a little bit earlier about net zero standards.
Yeah.
But it's that kind of thing. It's like, well, that's fine. Businesses expressing all these good desires. Like, what's the mechanism? You know, formal government agreements, that's one mechanism. But I think businesses are coming out with their own mechanism, net zero standards, and there are others. And how do we deal with greenwashing and all that kind of thing? And those are solutions that business comes away with. And the more concrete, if like we leave this COP, and then at least the framework around that is getting more concrete, and there's concrete ways to hold business to that commitments. And that's a great outcome. And it almost gets to the point where, you know, if they're backsliding or not, and hopefully there won't be, it kind of matters less and it matters less and less, because the private sector is moving ahead anyway, and especially finding ways to kind of make that enforceable and hold the players to account.
Very, very good use of the word concrete on the day of decarbonisation. Nice one.
Just
Matthew.
a quick, one thing, just to add, I don't know whether Mary and Gary knows too, or Andrew, just the amount of focus on nature-based solutions. So again, like just the nature-based solutions seem to be just prominent in pavilion after pavilion after pavilion in terms of running sessions on nature, also.
But it's also, it's not just nature-based solutions, it's the convergence of this COP and the other COP. So it's the convergence of climate and biodiversity. And I think that
Which is why BCSD is going to be at both.
But being in Africa is seminal to that, because Africa makes so much of its dollars from its natural beauty.
Yes.
And it's a logical place for the two to start coming together.
And as does Australia.
So maybe we can have a combined COP as COP.
Oh, I'm loving this idea.
COP 22.5 or something.
Well, there is a side conversation that goes on about the need for convergence of nature and climate. How can you have one without the other? And why are we necessarily intellectually segmenting them? Doesn't seem to make sense. Really quite mad. Big thank you for you all, obviously as members, to allow the support for us to, as BCSD, to be here. A safe farewell to you all as I stay here and remain, and welcome, in your case, Jai. Has he arrived?
No, I think we'll be getting in on Sunday. We've got Jay and Robin from our office.
Right. So you've got
the
two more coming in.
Yep.
It's just you. So
Yeah,
we farewell you.
And I will be tuning in to G'day Sharm El-Sheikh.
Excellent. And of course, as with Carrie.
I mean,
And
viewing.
yes. And we welcome back Peter Holt.
He arrives tomorrow.
He arrives tomorrow. So what we lose with these three, we gain with a few more in our delegation over the next few days. Don't forget that as BCSD members, the Monday.com board has been updated for the guide on COP27. We've uploaded in the last couple of hours all of the resources the WBCSD has been launching over the last couple of days, which actually goes to Gary's point around how do we help business around net zero. There was a very interesting session yesterday by WBCSD, McKinsey and Oxford University, who've put this new platform together called the Climate Drive. And ostensibly, they've put as much of leading practice around net zero that's been done by the WBCSD members on this platform. And the network, Australia and New Zealand, are going to be the two pilot testers of this particular platform in early 2023. So as members, if you want to come and be part of that, let me know, and we will make sure that you are involved in that testing. What was the other thing I wanted to say? Don't forget tomorrow. Tomorrow we've got Marty McBrien is back, and very excited that Lisa Jacobson, the CEO of the Business Council for Sustainable Energy from the United States, will also be joining us in this room as well. So very much thank you for joining us. But for now, I'm Andrew Petersen from Sharm El-Sheikh, and thanks very much. Talk to you soon. Bye for now.